You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Well, welcome to TFM's local books and comic show for Star Trek. I'm just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is every single episode, the one and the only, Casey Pettitt. How are you, Casey?
I am great. Here to talk some more comics, and maybe we'll do a book review in there too. But
yeah, maybe.
Just excited. We were just talking on the other side of the page about some Star Trek Picard. You know, living life large. If you haven't seen it, go see it.
Yes.
I don't know what else to say.
Yes. No,
get us more novels.
Yeah, I mean, it is the, you know, it seems like it's the thing that every Star Trek fan that I've seen has been talking about for, you know, the last 10 weeks. And of course, now what I see everybody talking about is not only that, but Star Trek Legacy. So yes, give us Star Trek Legacy, and, you know, maybe fill in some of those gaps that of places where you could fill in with some information there and some books. So I would love to see that. You know, I want to ask you about that, Casey. And before I ask the question, of course, just, you know, subscribe wherever you're listening. We love it. Of course, follow us on social media at Trek FM, on Twitter, at Trek FM, on Instagram, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Of course, the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference on Facebook that you can join just by typing Babel in there, and you can ask to join, and we can let you in. You can also find us at Trek.fm online with every show that we're doing here in the network. And, of course, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM, like Casey Pettitt or Greg Rosier, who are associate producers of Literary Treks, and their contributions every month make sure that all of the shows here on the network can keep coming to you each and every week. So if you do like what we do, go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of the team. So this was not part of the outline or anything like that, but, you know, Casey, we're a books and comics show, and bringing up the idea of them doing, you know, books and, you know, comics. We've already seen some comics, obviously. For the Picard timeline. We've had books for the Picard timeline. I wanted to ask you what you think the possibility of actually getting, you know, books to maybe fill in some details, especially between seasons 2 and 3, all of that kind of thing, maybe some other backstories, you know, the loss of the Enterprise E, those kind of things. Especially in light of the fact that it seems pretty obvious, as of this point, they have not announced Star Trek Legacy, but it seems like it would be kind of ridiculous for them not to. So with that in mind, the sense that they're going to be playing in this time period again, most likely, what do you see the validity of really having, you know, a lot of material literature-wise coming out?
I think it would be a very good idea just because there's so many gaps right now in this timeline. I mean, we've got the whole 20 years between Nemesis and Picard. We got one book or maybe a couple of the books that took place during that time. And so there's a lot of stories that they could tell there that could not interfere with other stories that they want to tell necessarily. Because if they do a Star Trek Legacy, they're not going to probably go back very far in time. We might see some flashbacks. We might get some on-screen dialogue that says something that happened. But I think that the books and the comic books and the audio dramas and, you know, there's a lot of different possibilities for them to tell some more stories that, like I said, don't interfere with what they might do in the future. And I think we've got a lot of great authors. We've got a lot of great comic book authors. We've got plenty of actors to do audio dramas. I mean, there's just so many different things that they could do, and kind of almost do what Star Wars has done with their novel lines, is kind of make a canon of books and comics that can inform what they do on screen, but not necessarily, be required reading for people. And I think that would be an interesting way for them to go and allow us to get more stories in that time.
No, I definitely can't disagree with that thought process. And I think, I saw somebody on Twitter that I follow that's also a listener, and I can't remember who it was, but they were calling for the fact that they wanted, more books and, comics to fill in the gaps. And I think that we are going to get some, but I don't think it's going to be a lot. And the reason that's the case is because I think they're going to be very careful with the type of material they're putting out, because even Star Wars is running into the problem that, books that they've had in their quote-unquote canon book series have been overwritten by things that we get in live action and or animation. And so, and as it should be, I mean, these are screen properties, first and foremost. And so I'm always very trepidatious when you try to really add, quote unquote canon material in literature, because the problem is that when you're playing in the time period that you're writing in, I think it really it's a difficult thing to do, to tell a story that matters enough that people are going to be glad that they read the story, while at the same time not doing anything that would step on the toes of what you would hope to be able to do in the future and on a show, especially in that time period. So, I would say, to me, it seems like the stories that would make the most sense would be something like the Enterprise E story. What happened there? I think, you're clearly not going to touch that, most likely in live action. And so that's a story you should tell. I think there's other stories you could tell. You could tell the story about how, the Borg Queen and the Changelings meet. That could be an interesting comic series, right? So there's things like that where, but again, I don't picture this being something we're going to get a ton of material from, just because, unfortunately, that is just the way it works when you're playing in these mediums.
And I think it was maybe David Mack on one of our conversations with him where he said that, somebody said that, the licensors are going to want content out there relevant to what's currently airing. So when we have Star Trek Picard airing, we're getting Star Trek Picard novels. We got Strange New Worlds. We've got, Strange New Worlds novels, and you're not seeing a lot of novels take place during the original runs of Next Generation. You're seeing some original series because that still sells, but you're not going to see a lot of Deep Space Nine books or Voyager books anymore, just because those aren't as, I don't want to say relevant, but they're not current, and so they want to, the tie-in media is meant to sell what they're already putting out. So I could see them giving us a Star Trek Picard novel or something in the not too distant future, but once we get too far past it, I'm not holding out a lot of hope. I want those stories, but I'd say IDW has a bigger chance of giving us those types of stories than especially something like a novel, just because they can, they're coming out with so many comic books that they can kind of put in these kind of special event, trilogies or, short run series.
Right.
And, I think that's the most likely place that we'll see something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously not going to be getting any books about the Enterprise G. That's just not going to happen. So I'm sorry to burst anybody's bubble. But, what they'll be doing is they will judiciously be filling in places in the story that you could, even, like you said, post-Nemesis, where, okay, how and where can we fill in this story that may bolster things, from the perspective of what we might see on screen, but doesn't detract at all from that either, because there might be, again, when you're thinking of doing the Star Trek Legacy series, you're going to want to be pulling from that time period's past to maybe build stories for the future, right? And so, again, this is the tough part about this, but I do think we'll get some stuff, and I think that would be exciting. And specifically, more than anything, I would really love to get a book, written by like John Jackson Miller, James Swallow, David Mack, Una, anybody, right, that talks about, what happened to the Enterprise E. One of my absolute favorite Enterprises. And so, and make that a really incredible story. But, it's one of those things like, and I don't want to be overly negative, but I also want to be, I feel like, really realistic to the situation as it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So, Casey,
I do have one prediction.
I love this. Okay, Casey's one prediction.
Sorry, this just popped into my brain, and you can timestamp it. They're going to announce Star Trek Legacy. Then, as it gets closer, they're going to announce a novel. It'll be like a Star Trek Picard novel, starring 7 of 9 under Captain Shaw on the Titan A. It'll be like a 7 of 9 adventure. So like leading up into that series, and maybe get some Sydney LaForge in there. So I'm just putting that out there because they kind of did a similar thing with Strange New Worlds. When the Enterprise War came out. It was really a Strange New Worlds prequel novel. And so I don't know. I'm just putting that out there.
I think that's a really good prediction and actually a fabulous idea. So if you're listening, Titan Books, you know who to pay for the idea. It's Casey Pettitt. He'll give you his address. In fact, you've already got it because we get the wonderful review copies of the books. So
yes.
Well, we've got a ton of comics, Casey. In fact, we have 4 comics we're going to be talking about. And first one up is Star Trek 6, which actually closes out the first part of this new ongoing series. And so I wanted to see what you thought of kind of wrapping up this first part of the story, because after this, we're about to jump into the crossover series with Defiant. So how did this one go for you?
This one, I mean, it was just kind of on par with the previous issues of this. It was, a lot of character focus, kind of very uniquely written, kind of similar to the previous issues. Again, the artwork was on point, and I gotta say there was one scene in here, I'm trying to find it on my iPad right now, but right before Ben and Jake and Beverly get saved by the Theseus, there's a scene very reminiscent of a scene in the last episode of Star Trek Picard with the Theseus right above them.
Yes.
As they're right about to get beamed up. But I mean, yeah, I think once more they're, I'm hooked on this series, and I'm excited to see where they go with it.
I liked the way in which, this first run here has been all about Sisko dealing with the ramifications of his choice to be one with the prophets. And this issue does such a great job of finally allowing Sisko to break free, I want to sing Queen. I want to break free. That's Sisko here, and he does, with actually the help of none other than Beverly Crusher, who reminds him who he is, before he was the emissary, just as a man, as a father. And it is that relationship which that spurs something really interesting, which she's made the second officer of the Theseus here, because he really appreciated her command ability. He really appreciated her ability to call him out, which, Sisko in that way is a little bit unlike Picard in the sense that he has a really strong personality, a really strong will, and I think more than a lot of other captains, he actually likes to be challenged, and so that whole thing was great. And then, to see them be able to create a first contact situation out of this god city, instead of going to war with it, and be able to wrap up this part of the story, but also, lead us into what's going to come next, I thought was great. So, one of the criticisms that I've heard about this comic is just, it's so outlandish, but this is legitimately as comic booky, comic-like storytelling that you're going to get with Star Trek. I mean, we are legitimately doing the Avengers team up. And it's, and the storytelling in many ways is comic book over the top. So, knowing that, I think I've appreciated the way in which they're telling the story, because to me it works.
Yeah, you do kind of have to set aside what you've seen on TV or even read in the novels, because, I wouldn't say this is quite Gold Key comic level, but you do get some of that, like you said, over the topness in their dialogue and just in the things that are happening. And, you do kind of have to suspend some disbelief on comic books in general, just because they're doing things that they generally can't do or just won't do in TV. Yep. And, I agree. I think that helps me with these comics too, is just to kind of step back and go, this is a fun story. It doesn't need to fit in anywhere specifically. Like, this doesn't need to, and it won't tie in with Star Trek Picard or anything like that. So, knowing that, I can just kind of sit back and have a fun story to read and see what kind of crazy hijinks they get into in the future issues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And so to me, I highly recommend issues 1 through 5 of this series. I think it's been pretty fantastic. The next comic that we have is Defiant Part 2, which is continuing that section of the story, Casey. And what's interesting is, like the first issue of Defiant, this issue actually travels back in time a little bit to get us where we end up at the very last page of issue 1, which is to actually tell us the story of them going to find Lore and, capture him, and then to move the story forward where they're now hot on the trail of what's going on with Kahless and trying to figure out where he is.
Yeah, this is just another story it's got that over the topness to it, and what's actually kind of fun, I think, about this one too, is it's got B'Elanna Torres in it, and Tom Paris, her husband, is in the ongoing Star Trek issues, so it's kind of fun to see them both in these. But I actually like, I think, the artwork too in this one better than the Star Trek ongoing series. Just like the characters look a little bit more like themselves. It's a little bit more towards the realism, but again, you're still getting those kind of outlandish stories here too. But seeing this particular group of people coming together is it's pretty interesting. Seeing somebody like Rowe and Torres interact, both former Maquis, with still different kind of perceptions on things, I guess, that where they're kind of almost bickering between each other. but still having to come and work together. And then you have Worf, the warrior, in charge, and you got Spock there who, he's prone to some cowboy diplomacy. And so he kind of almost fits in, with this too. And, I think we'll get a pretty interesting story, and I'm wondering how, we'll kind of weave in between Defiant and the Star Trek ongoing, the stories together, if like they'll eventually kind of totally split apart and do their own thing, or is Defiant going to go away, or, what's going to happen. So I'm very intrigued by this series so far. And, it's another one I definitely think people should pick up.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I do as well find interesting about this story is, it feels like the ongoing series, but like you said, it also has its own feel, and that's because, Worf is in charge here, and, things are a little bit more by the seat of your pants. And of course, the crew that he's assembled here is a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, for the most part. And, so, and they're all breaking the law by having stolen the Defiant. So they are a bunch of ne'er-do-wells and thieves. Yeah. And so it's great. And like you said, I think the art is really good here. I'm really enjoying the art. Again, I like the way it differentiates itself from the Star Trek ongoing, and I think it looks good. So, no, I'm right there with you. I've really enjoyed this 2 issues so far, and I'm excited to see them connect together as we begin to do that crossover. So I think that's going to be great. The third comic we have is the Illyrian Enigma number 4, and this is actually the finale of this series, which I'm very interested to see what you think of this, especially since we wrap up the story and we give an answer for the story. And we have an answer, but it doesn't actually lead to Una being released. Yeah,
which, I mean, could kind of see that coming since they left that on a cliffhanger, at the end of last season. We were just talking kind of just a little bit ago about how, we're not going to have comic books that are required reading, before you go into season 2. You don't want to end on the cliffhanger of Una being arrested and then just have her show up on episode 1. That's a lower decks kind of thing that you would do, is just not explain somebody coming back. This one, I was a little bit, I really like this story overall, but I really want to see where it goes in the show. This last issue probably wasn't as strong, I guess, as for me, as the previous issues, just because it was kind of a lot more just talking and kind of concluding on everything that had happened in the previous issues. We do find kind of the Vulcans' involvement in the Illyrians, kind of genetic makeup. And then we're basically told, okay, don't say anything about that because, like the Illyrians, that's their history. And so now we're like kind of just left where we were at the beginning with it, just with a little bit more knowledge that we can't do anything with. So it was a little bit, like I said, I don't want to say it was a letdown because it was still a decent story and a good kind of conclusion with a somewhat of a cliffhanger to the series. But I don't know, it just didn't do it for me as much as the other ones did.
I think that you're right on track with that, because I think the thing that we were so surprised about this series is the fact that it was actually telling what seemed to be a pretty substantial story in the comics, and then it pulls the, oh, well, we're really not going to tell you anything important or do anything important because we can't do anything important. And that is to be expected, as you mentioned. But And it is interesting. I mean, the revelations I did find interesting, right? I mean, the idea that, in the past, before Surak's teachings had really taken hold there on Vulcan, the Vulcans had been going out into space and basically playing God with other species. They even mentioned the idea that they thought of themselves more as gods compared to the Illyrians, and their experience go horribly wrong with them and lead to their decimation of their planet. And yet the Illyrians then take those ideas, and then that's what enables them to become people who can genetically engineer themselves. And they don't do it for any other reason than to stay alive. In the same way that, I always thought it was interesting in Enterprise, of course, the Denobulans also do some genetic engineering on themselves as well. So it seems a little bit strange that actually isn't brought up at all in the idea with the Illyrians that, we have a whole other species that's been a part of our lives since the time of Archer. And anyway, but no, I'm with you in the sense that, we are unfortunately kind of left in a place where now we've got to see what they do with season 2, which is coming out in June, so we don't have too long to wait. I think overall, the series is good, but I'm with you in the sense that, issue 4 becomes a slight letdown because it doesn't feel like it has as much weight as the series did up until this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it almost seemed like they almost needed to take this a little bit further. Well, one of two things, I guess. Take it a little bit further, give us a little bit more, and have one more issue that leads right into the opening episode of season 2.
Yeah.
Or they could have added a couple pages of this kind of flashback, this eureka moment to the previous issue and kind of ended it there rather than taking 27 pages or however long it is to basically do conference room scenes and a little bit of flashback and put the toys back on the shelf, so, I mean, I think as a whole, the Illyrian Enigma is still worth reading for people, especially as they lead into the new season. But it does remain to be seen. I mean, I'm very excited for the next season. I don't think they're going to drag it out too long when they only have 10 episodes per season.
Right.
But, I'm really hoping that this does kind of help shed some light on whatever they do in the show.
Yes, me too. No, I completely agree with you. And, in some ways, I do think it will. I think the 7 comic that we read prior to season 3 allowed us to be able to have a little bit of her story and her struggle as moving towards the idea of being back in Starfleet. And of course, we know how that played out now. She's the captain of the Enterprise. So it did fill in a little bit of that thought process for that character. And so obviously, I think this is going to be the exact same. Our last comic is our first issue of Deep Space Nine, The Dog of War, which is taking place after the Federation has reclaimed Deep Space Nine, and yet we know, unfortunately, that the Federation is having a very tough time here, and their losses are continuing to mount. And so what did you think of this story and the fact that everybody loves this dog?
Well, I mean, who wouldn't love the dog, first of all?
Unless you're allergic, but,
Well, I suppose. Nobody in the comic was allergic. I almost think Quark, of all people, would have been the one who was allergic, especially since he was stuck with the dog. But no, I think I was pleasantly surprised by this one because, when we saw the lead up to this or just the announcement of it and kind of the little blurb we got about it when they announced it, I was a little unsure how I felt about just this, if we're going to revisit Deep Space Nine, let's do it right. And I actually think they're on the right track here. The dog's kind of an interesting piece of it, and I'm really interested to see where they take that. But we also get some kind of depth with Sisko when they find this Borg tech and realizing that he still has a lot of trauma from, even after the events of Emissary and him kind of realizing that he lives in the past. When he encounters this Borg tech, he kind of has some moments of that too. And just some deep moments there with some levity, with Quark and the dog and Vic showing up, which is cool to see him in the comics. But, I think it was actually a decent start to what might have been a pretty off the wall thing that they're doing. And right now it seems like a maybe fairly straightforward story that they're about to tell.
I really enjoyed this one as well. I was also surprised as to where we decided to go with it. And, the idea of there being this Borg tech that could possibly help them find a way to get one up on the Dominion was fascinating. And to watch Sisko be able to deal with this, especially after his experience with the Borg, I thought was fascinating, and we sometimes forget that he had such a harrowing experience with them and has a very personal stake against anything Borg because of it, just as much as Jean-Luc does, really, right? And so I thought that was awesome to do, and I think it was also great to see the way in which, very Sisko-like, okay, if we're going to test whether or not this is something that could actually work, I'm taking it upon myself, which, is something that, again, is very Sisko. So I also thought it was interesting, too, that, the insertion of a dog here for these characters in a time when they are all suffering, I actually thought was a really, it is a strangely fortuitous event for them, because it's bringing joy to their lives in a way that they didn't expect in a time when there is very little joy. So the whole idea with the dog here actually worked way better for me than I actually thought it would, because of that. And so I'm very excited to see, where this story goes, because right now what their desire was to do a comic that felt like episodes that you just hadn't seen. And I feel like so far they're nailing that. Agreed.
Yeah. The whole story does. I mean, I don't know that they would have ever done a dog episode on Deep Space Nine, but at the same time, I don't know. They did a lot of crazy episodes.
I mean, they had Vic,
Yeah. And, and I love his involvement here. Like, they get all the characters pretty well involved here. There wasn't anybody that was really left out. Even Worf is there with the dog. And,
right.
He even comments that the dog sheds more than Spock ever did. And then we also get an interesting kind of little tease kind of connection to, I think it was the Nth Degree.
Yep, that was
Star
great.
Trek Next Generation episode. Yeah, just really cool callback. And so this just, really well done. I'm very, I'm really looking forward to the next issue of this to see where they go. And, who doesn't want more Deep Space Nine?
Yep, could not agree more on that. So, well, Casey, that is all the comics we have. It is time to head back to Deep Space Nine. I mean, Emissary's Sanctuary,
I guess,
with the Courageous. Okay, Casey, so we are back in our series here, Rebels, which is a 3-part series in the Deep Space Nine novels. And I'm just going to say this right now. This is probably not going to be the longest segment we've ever done when it comes to reviewing a book, and I think it'll be pretty clear as to why as we get into this. I hate to spoil it right up front, but yeah, I just wanted people to be aware. So we're in the second book in this series, and the crew is split up into a few different areas around this planet. And the first is Sisko and O'Brien and Worf and Quark. And their role in this story is to try to get from one side of the planet basically to the other so that they are able to turn off the technology that's making all of these, quote-unquote magical toys work. So therefore, when the Cardassians attack the Tefniks, that they will have already started learning how to live without their technology. And oh, by the way, they meet some talking horse things on the way as well. So, this is. What did you think of this?
In the last segment when I said, "Who doesn't want more Deep Space Nine?" I don't know. I think in any other setting, some of this could have worked. It's just gone on too long. I almost feel like these talking horse things, which sure, I've read fantasy books and I've read a lot of sci-fi and whatever. Talking animals, fine. And who says that the only intelligent life on a planet has to be humanoid? But the fact that these things kind of just came along, it was kind of a Deus Ex Machina. They had a long way to go, not much food left. Hey, there's these horse things here. Let's go ride them. Oh, they talk. Let's ask their permission. They grant us permission. Great. We got where we needed to go. It was just this, it was filler. I don't know. I had enough of this whole story with Sisko and the crew and these Tifnakis that they're trying to teach to work without tech. In the previous book, I thought the first book did a lot better with this part of the story than this one did. Every time I got to this part, I didn't care. I kind of forgot even why they were doing what they were doing. I kind of forgot the whole plot of turning off whatever the Cardassians are doing to block all the tech. So it kind of droned on too long, and it just could have done without it, this book, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that it does feel like this story seems to be throwing everything in the kitchen sink into it. So, the fact that we all of a sudden now have talking animals, and I know they start to begin to explain a little bit or theorize a little bit. Jadzia and Julian talk about that somewhat, but it never really comes together in a way that, of course, makes any sense. And most of the story is not making a lot of sense. There's very few ways in which they're actually starting to connect things, which is, frustrating, I think, as well, because the Dax and Julian story I found to be almost utterly useless and so dumb because it's connected with what's happening on the Defiant. And are you legitimately telling me that Jadzia Dax is not smart enough to realize that the best solution to this problem is not to use a shuttlecraft to try and get to the surface, but to just slowly ascend the Defiant itself? It was the biggest issue with both of these storylines is that they're just so utterly dumb, and they make the people in them really dumb. And it's a very frustrating thing because, these characters aren't dumb. They're not supposed to be they aren't on the show. And so I was just, when you said you didn't care about the story with Sisko and the crew he's with, this is the part of the story that when we started to meet sea monsters too, I was like, you know what? I'm done. And then we didn't even finish that story of the Defiant getting to the surface in the mouth of the sea monster who is now helping them because they can communicate. So what we have here is no failures to communicate, apparently.
Right. Everybody's communicating with everybody.
There's communication all over the place.
Everywhere. Like even the tongues inside this sea monster are communicating with them. Yeah, it's just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier. I mean, some of this stuff, I wrote down that some of the plot elements in this book were very comic booky, like we were saying when we were talking about the comic books, like sometimes a comic book has to be kind of over the top. I don't want that in my novels. Like, with the sea monster, and sure, there's, as Qui-Gon Jinn says, there's always a bigger fish, but, to think, like you said, to think that Jadzia would be so dumb to think that, taking a runabout would be better than just taking the Defiant itself, which they end up doing anyway. Literally by the end of this book, Dax and Julian's whole escapades this entire book are completely moot because they could have taken a shuttle from that point, right? From whatever 70 meters below, or whatever it was,
or they could have just scubaed from 70 meters. Like seriously, come on,
even better, And so, and to think that was the best way to hide from the Cardassians that are in orbit, rather than just being on the other side of the planet like they always do. And the way that Jadzia was written, really the way all of the characters were written, really made it feel like, and I think I said this when we talked about the first book in the series, is it feels like these books were written before the show ever aired, like just based on character profiles in like the show Bible or something. Because even Dax herself, not only is she written to be kind of dumb, but she's like so scared all the time. And like Julian's having to like comfort her and everything. It was just so not who she was like on the show. She was so strong in the show, and maybe she'd get scared, but like so would anybody. But she's like hugging her knees, almost in a fetal position, kind of scared about some stuff. And it just, once again, I felt like I was reading something that, maybe this author wrote it for something else and just shoehorned it into the Star Trek Deep Space Nine characters or something. It was just weird reading it because it just didn't fit with what I knew. And there was kind of so much to forgive, and really both of these, the Sisko story and the Dax and the Defiant, or Dax and Julian, and then the Defiant storylines, that it's just like there's kind of too much to forgive. Like I just can't, I can't just put some of these things aside and enjoy it. It was just very tough to get through these parts.
No, I don't think that you're being too harsh. I think that it is quite unfortunate that the storylines here just seem so, I would say, kind of insane. And again, I think the biggest part is that they just don't really fit. They don't really make a lot of sense. And, even, I mean, I think that Jadzia and Julian's best part of the story here is the fact that they're theorizing about this planet in the first place. How are all these people like that? I mean, how did all this stuff get here? And that's the only thing. It's like, okay, they're thinking that maybe they were left here, or there's genetic engineering going on, or there's all this type of stuff that they're asking these questions. And I think all of that is it's like, okay, finally we're trying to figure out what's going on here. But it just, I think the problem is that it just doesn't really work. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I think it's just that the whole book just I don't know. It's hard to even describe, and I think in all honesty, as to what is going on here, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and on top of that, we have an orb experience with Kai Wynn, because there's that whole story going on in Deep Space Nine as they're being attacked by these unknown aliens. And the problem I think about that is that one, we know from the series, unfortunately, that Kai Wynn's never had any experience with the prophets like this. The orbs have never spoken to her. So this butts up against that, which is definitely frustrating. Kind of hurts the storyline. And two, we finally get the connection as to how that storyline that's going on and the storyline on the planet that we're on connect. And it's the person that Kai Wynn, as a sister during the occupation, belonged to, the Cardassian she belonged to, is the same person that is here on this planet and one of the Cardassians there. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of saw that one coming a mile away. The fact that I figured the Cardassians on this planet with the Defiant crew had to be connected to the Cardassians in her past somehow. And the orb experience is something that's one of those things I can kind of forgive if the book was written before it was announced on the show that she'd never had that experience. And I don't remember exactly, except I think these books came out around the time the series was ending. So whenever that happened on the show, they could have gone back and taken that scene out, because I don't think it really did anything for this story. Right. I guess I understood what I thought the promise of these books was going to be, when we started reading them, was getting more background about Kai Wynn, who she was.
Right.
The first book, even the whole premise of it was that Starfleet is trying to kind of test the Bajorans to see if they're going to be able to run the former Deep Space Nine, now Emissaries Sanctuary, on their own, without Starfleet's help or without as much aid from the Federation as they've been getting up to this point. This book really didn't address that at all, except for the fact that the station is still under attack by these unknown aliens. And I'm kind of okay with that. Like, I'm interested in this story. Like, Kira's story would be interesting to see how she's dealing with this, except for the fact that her relationship with the Kai is way less combative than it was in the show. Like, she never liked Wynn on the show, but in here she's referring to her as my Kai, and just kind of following orders. And maybe sometimes she has the thought about, the Kai doesn't know what she's doing or whatever, but ultimately it almost seems like Kira is kind of on board with the Kai now. And Kai Wynn doesn't seem like the evil person that we know her to be. And what I wanted, as I read more of her past, like the 30 years ago story, like during the occupation, that was the story that I wanted more of. That was the one that was kind of interesting in some ways, seeing what she had to deal with during the occupation. Not in so much the way that I wanted to have her have this like kind of tragic background, to where we like kind of sympathize with her by the end, but something at least to kind of show how Wynn became the Wynn that we knew.
Yes.
And maybe we get more of that in the third book. I'm not holding my breath for it. And I hope that we don't just, now that we've got that connection with the Gull that she belonged to during the occupation on this planet, I hope we don't just give up this past storyline. I hope we continue with that and can connect it more, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm not holding my breath for that, but There's just so much potential for this story. Like, it could have gone in so many different ways, and I just feel like the way that it went, it's not even suffering from middle book syndrome, you know, like kind of the middle chapters. It's just, I don't know. Like, it's like they took one book and they wanted to split it into three.
Yep.
I think we said that last time too.
Yeah, I mean, it's so clear that this story had no reason to be 3 books. It could have easily be edited into one. You know, this isn't a long book, and unfortunately, it's not a book that made me care about the story anymore, which was so disappointing, because one of the things I was hoping for was that this would actually be a book that would bring that more into focus, you know, bring the story more into focus and bring, you know, my enjoyment then of it into focus in a way that would make me excited to read the final book. And, you know, because of the conversation so far, Casey, I am fascinated to see, you know, where you are going to be with the ratings for The Courageous, which I don't really feel like, can I just say that I don't really feel like anybody was actually courageous in this book?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The title maybe was just trying to play on the other titles, because I think the next one's called The Liberated, and maybe we'll see some liberation there. I hope. Yeah, this one. So I gave it a 2 on Goodreads, and I don't want to be harsh, but it's not a strong 2. It is. If I could give half stars on Goodreads, I'd probably give it a 1.5. I don't think it was so, well, it was pretty bad. I'll say that. I was really trying to decide if to give it a 1 or a 2, but, and I think it was just enough to go with the 2 instead of a 1, just because of the flashback story with Kai Wen, just because there was something interesting there. You could see her during the occupation as a rebel, as a resistance fighter, basically, and seeing how she had to think quick on her feet. I would want a whole book of that over anything else that we got in this book. And, yeah, so I'll stick with 1.5, but on Goodreads, it's a 2. But yeah, this is one of the occasions where I didn't look at your rating before we, started. So I've got to hear what you have to say.
So, you know, I think when we do this, you know, there's never a reason for me to want to be mean or cruel or anything about, a book. But I do legitimately believe this to be just one of the worst books I've ever read. It's so unevenly paced. It's so all over the place. Even the storyline with Kai Wen is so pedestrianly done. There's just not a lot interesting going on there. And it almost just feels like we're writing things on a piece of paper to write things on a piece of paper without really any forethought as to trying to create a truly cohesive and interesting narrative. And so for me, yeah, this is a clear 1-star book, which I am reticent to give anything that type of rating. But this is unfortunately at the point where, yeah, we are going to finish the series, but it's because we started it. And, you know, maybe somehow, yeah, we're able to make it through. I don't know, Casey. But yeah, this is unfortunately, not the best of Deep Space Nine.
Well, we've committed to finish what we're starting, but we don't have to do that right away. We could do other things. And I'm looking forward to reading other things. And, you know, like we said before, probably for the first book in this series, we had some really good comics to read. So it's not a total loss this time. And, you know, I mean, we'll see. We'll go into that future and we'll see what we regret in the past.
Yeah, I'm glad we'll be finishing off the Voyager series, and then we'll have the new book coming out by Dayton Ward, and we've got that. So I mean, that'll be interesting to do. But we're gonna have the Voyager book, then we'll have the Deep Space Nine book, and then we've got Dayton coming in, which is pretty exciting. I'm excited for what we do have coming up next. So, but Casey, if people wanted to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, definitely, where would they find you?
Well, a really good place to see what I'm reading is on Goodreads, and I'm also on Letterboxd, both at Knitting Trekkie. Not really active anywhere else except for the Babel conference. I do like looking in there from time to time, see what people are saying, seeing what people are reading. So yeah, definitely reach out there. And Matthew, when you're not holding your breath for however long it takes as you try not to get the bends coming out of the water, where can people find you? Oh, gosh.
Well, you could find me all over the place under the moniker MattRushing02. Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero are the places to find me the most. You can also find me here on the network doing a bunch of other shows. One is the 602 Club, where we talk about all of those fandoms outside of Star Trek, as there's so much there for us to love and want to talk about. So I hope you'll check that out. Of course, you can also find me on Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise. We go through the 20th anniversary rewatch. We've got the Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine and the 30th anniversary rewatch there. Of course, Star Trek Picard just wrapped up. Chris Jones and I talked all about that on the Artificial Tango, so hopefully people will check that out. And we talked about this. Saddle Up is coming back because Strange New Worlds is coming back in June, so you'll want to check that out as well. Over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got 2 shows. One is called Owl Post. I did that with Dre Kaufman, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And last but not least, doing aggressive negotiations with the great John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.